And now we come to the final list of 2016, my top 50 favourite albums of the year. In the case that you want to skip to a certain part of the video, there are timestamps below in the description, as well as a full list of the albums down below. Keep in mind that this is just my opinion, but that's just a given. You should probably be very aware of that. So yeah, let's talk about my top 50 favourite albums of 2016. Here are some honourable mentions.
And I stumbled in the water, I was tripping, I was choking shit. Shot kiss me, hold me tight. 신병마다 힘을 받은 whole world.
I want to also give a couple of shout outs as well. One to the Full Moon at Midday album, Mum Won't Let Me Party, basically for a bit of fun. Then we've got the Animals as Leaders album that came out this year. That was so mind-bendingly complex that it almost gave me a concussion. And of course, the surprise album drop from Run the Jewels with Run the Jewels 3. I've already listened to it, and I'm planning to review it next year in 2017. And it's not going to make the list this year because I'd rather count it as a 2017 release in all honesty. But I just wanted to give some attention to it because it's Run the Jewels, for crying out loud. But now that we've got all that out of the way, let's get on to the meat of the video, the top 50 albums.
Mr. Sandman, won't you put me to sleep? No roof on the house and nothing in here to eat. I have so much physical but nothing left mental.
Look, I know there's a dab on the front cover, but bear with me. This album isn't actually like a cringeworthy trend follower or anything. It's not about riding your swagway to Starbucks, rocking your I Love Lele Pons t-shirt. This probably runs a little deeper than that, to be honest. 9 Callisto's introspective tracks on here are scattered amongst others that may seem like obnoxious brag raps at the surface, but in the context of the album, it is kind of presenting a message about, you know, the idea of using a character to kind of hide your insecurities or fears. To kind of explore that idea of the artist in the music compared to the artist as a person in real life. And even music-wise, the album just shows a vast improvement from 9 Callisto's previous work in terms of writing, performance, and selecting good beats to ride. On the whole, 9 Callisto seems far more confident and bold and focused as ever.
But I recall I called you hey.
If you've ever wanted a soundtrack for walking through an enchanted forest at midnight, this short solo album from the on and off member of Animal Collective, Deakin, will be well up your street. Bringing an experimental and unexpected palette of sounds to drum and bass music is Noisia, an electronic trio who specialise in some of the most mind-bending, perplexing, yet constantly interesting tracks in the genre. It's very zany, unpredictable, a lot of off-kilter beats. It's just great that out of all the other genres being toyed around with, drum and bass is also getting its own weird, twisted, demented makeovers as well.
And everyone was sad as blank as a cake, and in love like a stupid lump of clay.
On the softer side is Wilco's latest album, a sweet and gentle lullaby-esque folk record that won't blow your mind as much as it'll settle you into bed with some cookies and milk and a warm blanket. And number 46, one of the scariest musical experiences of this year, as well as an extremely unique use of the Inuit style of throat singing, it's Tanya Tagaq with Retribution. Tanya's skills as a throat singer, as well as her creativity when it comes to building a world with it, totally come through on Retribution, a record so uncomfortable and dark that you should probably not make the mistake that I made when I first listened to it, and that is listen to it at 3 in the bloody morning. Progressive rock, synth pop, and little snippets of chiptune fold neatly into a nice compact yellow ball with a smiley face drawn on it. It's Crying's latest album, one of the happiest and most uplifting releases in recent memory. Don't let the intentionally tacky album cover make you think that it's some discount 90s Christian rock compilation. This album is quite exciting, it's very uplifting, and you know, for a band called Crying, their music is surprisingly happy. Even more down that yellow brick road of happy thoughts. Could it be? It's KKB!
Get up, what's that in the sky? Could it be? It's KKB!
Colourful and chirpy production, creative and silly song topics, beats that could totally be in some retro video game like Konami, Crazy Racers or something, vocal performances with so much whimsical character to them, they sound like they're straight out of a children's show. If anything, this might as well be music that even children could jam out to, which is probably why I get weird reactions when I play this album. Bet you've never heard an art pop album this politically charged, eh?
So drone bomb me, blow me from the mountains into the sea.
Drone bombing, climate change, government surveillance, the death penalty, systematic oppression, the Obama presidency. Sure, the lyrics on this album that cover those topics aren't really that subtle about their message, but Anohni's blatancy does suit some of these hard-hitting instrumentals, and some of the ways in which he presents these messages are very clever. Post-minimalism had its ass kicked with James Ferraro's latest album, a flurry of sounds taken straight out of commercials, computers, PSAs. It's so cleverly composed and provides the perfect soundtrack to a futuristic, consumerist society just eating itself up. Hang on, is that futuristic? That sounds a lot closer than I might think. David Lynch's TV series Twin Peaks is considered to be one of the greatest bits of television ever. At least the first season anyways. Its soundtrack was beautiful, but most importantly, incredibly eerie. It was creepy, it was harrowing, it was perfect to suit the heart-wrenching and heart-startling moments that the show had to offer. But your boy Shushu decided to do a covers album of that soundtrack, and it is so well executed. Like, this is very much what a cover album ideally should be. They do provide a unique spin on the original songs, but in the case of covering Twin Peaks soundtrack, it would also be important to kind of preserve the original intention of the soundtrack, which was to be beautiful but also very eerie, which Shushu does in spades. The crunchy, crushing, industrial, and post-punk style of Shushu just suits Twin Peaks soundtrack so bloody well. Grime is very much a UK thing for hip-hop, and of course we had Skepta's latest album Konnichiwa, which was able to garner a lot of attention towards grime overseas. However, there was one absolutely fantastic and bombastic grime/UK hip-hop record that was so slept on this year. It's Kano with Made in the Manor. Made in the Manor.
In the cookie jar, ripping off rips. I guess that's taking the flipping biscuit. Stealing the living with your sticky fingers. Crossing that pond and fishing for hits.
Sharp lyrics, punchy hooks and flows, beats that'll stir up a lot of energy, and ideally will also spark interest in those who perhaps aren't necessarily that intrigued by grime.
Stayed at the Ace Hotel, call loud. I would just be floating to you now.
The more I listened to this new record from Bon Iver, the more I was able to pull from its surreal and deliciously bizarre world. Sure, you're still getting YouTube videos that are trying to expose Justin Vernon as a Satanist, but hey, people tried doing that with The Weeknd too. Shame on you musicians for trying to express your artistic message by using occult or religious symbolism. Anyways, there is a genuine beauty hiding behind all the chaos on this album. I mean, you can still find that rootsy folk sound beyond the layers of noise and odd vocal samples, but I think even those layers of noise and odd vocal samples are still used beautifully on 22 A Million. I'd say they're essential to completing Vernon's spiritual journey on this album. I thought that 22 a Million didn't just have a refreshing sound, but also said refreshing sound was otherworldly and beautiful in the way that it was used on this album.
A bird with a word came to me, the sweetness of a honeycomb tree, and now my look was taking over me.
Funky fresh is a good way to describe Malibu. Anderson .Paak has the kind of swagger that could set your damn hair on fire if you weren't careful. This whole album is a dreamy haven. Even the cover art looks like Anderson .Paak's jamming that piano in a dream world of sorts. If you like groovy funk / soul / R&B, you're bound to love this.
But if you're gonna talk like that, at least buy another round, and we can keep drinking till St. Dymphna kicks us out.
Sometimes it's great to just strip things down and go back to the basics of a ballad featuring a piano and your vocals. Beautifully simple but very effective, considering it brings a lot of attention to Conor Oberst's just heartbreaking lyrics. And let's not forget there's a harmonica occasionally. When samba music comes to mind, you might think of something very festive and cheerful. However, Brazilian performer Elza Soares and her backing jazz band perform a series of tracks that offer a much nuttier, more unsettling twist on that style of music, also fusing samba with elements of post-rock and post-punk and jazz.
Beleza, mano, fica com Deus. Quando der a gente se tromba firmeza. Beleza, mano, fica com Deus. Quando der a gente se tromba.
Also lyrically, in the language of Portuguese of course, delving into the harsh realities of life in urban Brazil, a subject matter all too relevant especially during a year where the Olympic season was alive. Certainly the perfect soundtrack for a computer monstrously coming to life and wreaking havoc, maybe encountering a few glitches and viruses here and there. It's just so imaginable thanks to this staggering effort from the algorithm. Brute Force combines metal and EDM in an explosive, energetic fashion.
You have no right to be depressed. You haven't tried hard enough to like it. Haven't seen enough of this world yet. But it hurts to stop your whining.
An indie rock / garage rock highlight for the year surely, Will Toledo from Car Seat Headrest vented a lot of justified frustrations from the viewpoint of a young person, a millennial more specifically, who feels totally anxious and stressed out and like they have no direction in life after leaving school. I know millennial whinging isn't the most appealing thing, but Will Toledo presents it with a lot of wit. You know, there is a lot of cleverness on songs like Drugs with Friends, or Fill in the Blank, or the Ballad of Costa Concordia. Some of these moments even sound heartbreaking at times. And as an indie / garage rock album, there is a lot of ambition on Teens of Denial. There is an 11-minute song. An 11-minute song! There are only 2 motifs on this thing, and yet despite the fact that it carries on for 49 minutes, it doesn't ever get tiresome. And that's all thanks to Waklo Zimple and Co.'s engaging build-ups, making the repetition of certain musical phrases sound hypnotic instead of painfully tedious. The whole album flows smoothly, layered with rich instrumentation, without a single moment that doesn't sound gorgeous.
No further will I travel aimlessly along this fool's errand, no longer there.
Punk rock legends Descendents punch out a lot more rough-edged, humorously tinged punk tunes that show that even decades into their career they can still put out something that's exciting and entertaining. A washing machine to make music? You must be mental! Well, Matmos pulled it off so well and so creatively, really taking every detail of a wash cycle. You get some electric zaps, the washing machine just shaking and booming, the water swishing around, some of the beeping when you press the buttons. There's just a load of sounds going into this thing. You know, it really does take every detail and sound out of a wash cycle and make some genuinely awesome beats that are textured, they're fun, they're unpredictable, and constantly interesting. Anyone keen for some more UK hip-hop?
Can't read a book by its plastic covering, can't judge a tree by the size of a seed. Everybody's in a big rush to the future, there's more to life than increasing its speed. That's not me, that's...
Yes, I know Dabbler's attitude does come on very strongly, but I actually enjoy that a lot with his new album. It's fresh, the lyrics don't take themselves too seriously, they're tongue-in-cheek, the beats are a little experimental as well. It makes for a collection of unconventional bangers, the kind that have a weird but intriguing flavour to them, like sour worms. Electropop in the charts wasn't exactly on one of its high peaks this year. The fad seemed so formulaic, and even past that, the sounds were so flat and run-of-the-mill, they went by and were forgotten so quickly. Thankfully, Australian producer Flume decided to bring a new twist to this whole electropop thing by bringing wonky music to the mainstream, which is a pretty ambitious move considering wonky isn't one of the most accessible genres of music out there. It's a little more abstract, experimental, kind of off-kilter, but it ended up being a real breath of fresh air when seeing some of those tracks reaching the Hot 100 on several occasions. From poppier singles such as Never Be Like You to glitchier instrumental treats like Wallfuck and Pika, Flume shows versatility as an artist as well as creativity. My only hope for the future is that he continues to explore that glitchy, weird, abstract side of things, because that's really what makes his music even more interesting over the course of this album. That's the stuff that I find the juiciest. The juiciest. But if you liked Flume's glitchy approach to electropop, then you might like Lido's Everything. It's an interesting take on what you'd describe as a breakup album, but it's also an interesting take on electropop music in general. It uses tropes in the genre such as the build-up and the drop, and even different characteristics of popular music like auto-tune, and actually plays with these aspects very cleverly, like using these to help represent the idea of someone who's just fallen out of love, or someone who's just broken up and they're emotionally spiraling out of control. It's executed very well and vividly. Musically refreshing too, pulling influences not just from glitch and EDM, but also hip-hop, R&B, even jazz on that opening track too. There's also some gospel as well. I mean, if there's anything to really just show that electropop still has a lot to offer if artists just decide to be a little more creative with it, then Lido's Everything is just a signpost of that.
Stand carved from a wooden staff. I'm trying to relive days that I couldn't grab. I looked up what Lena Dunham said and I shouldn't have. I don't know how.
Much like the title suggests, this is quite a cinematic and even artful rap record that would certainly interest even those who aren't fully engaged with hip-hop. Thanks to Paul White's enchanting, gorgeous production and the endlessly entertaining, humorous commentary kind of raps that you'd expect from an MC called Open Mike Eagle. When you've got a track literally titled I Went Outside Today, you've got to expect some self-aware, smart, humorous content. Certainly a very underrated release in hip-hop this year, and something that a lot of people like you should really, really check out, and don't let it just die unnoticed. Fantagram got bigger, catchier and more ambitious on their latest album. A trip-hop record that is on the poppier side of things, but not drained of anything that would make it a superb, punchy, buzzing in your ears hours after their first listen kind of album. I mean, it's not coincidental that there's a picture of fire on this thing.
Annoyingly, this part of the video didn't really copy over properly, so I can't really edit it, so I'll just have to talk to you over the microphone. We are now at the top 25 albums of 2016, the second half of the list, so this is going to be pretty good. At number 25, we have a huge comeback album. Huge in the fact that, you know, we've been waiting for so long, and huge in the fact that the actual content was fantastic. It was from a highly respected artist that people have been waiting for more content from for years, ever since their debut album. It's the Avalanches with Wildflower. Australian Plunderphonics trio, the Avalanches, still pulled their sampling game up for their first album in 16 years, but here they did decide to switch things up. It's a venture into neo-psychedelia. In other words, a lot of colours. The music here continues to be very creative and also brings on guest features for the first time, and many of them do their parts a lot of justice, especially the likes of Danny Brown and Biz Marquis, whose personalities fit so well into the cartoony, road trip-esque world of Wildflower.
I'm praying to catch you whispering, I'm praying you catch me listening, I'm praying you catch me.
If I'm being honest, I wasn't planning to check out Lemonade when it first came out, but thanks to peer pressure and the unbearable following of hype known as the bandwagon, I just gave in. And wow, I'm glad I gave in because this is actually bloody good. It's certainly the most varied release from Beyonce yet. She dabbles in so many genres and it actually does them a lot of justice. A lot of soulful R&B ballads, which for me are the high point on this album, but there's also hip-hop, rock, even country. It's not just this variation in genres that she's exploring, but the album is structured very cleverly to tell a story about trust in a relationship and the point of view of someone whose trust is beginning to crumble due to an affair. It's far smarter an album than the mainstream hype might make some people believe it to be. Lemonade is great, right? We cool? Cool.
I left some years of giving a light. I left some will the spirit away. I let my fears materialize. I let my skills deteriorate.
Hip-hop's wordsmith decided to get all personal on this album, telling stories about his youth, the hip-hop scene today, his inspirations, his fears, but all with the fantastic vocab-rich lyrics that he's come to be known for. Granted, the messages of each song aren't as cryptic as they usually are on previous records like Skeleton, None Shall Pass, or Labor Days, but that was definitely the point. These tracks are more like an honest conversation. A$AP Rock seems like he wants to get these personal messages out there and understood. But the compromise isn't damaging to the album either. I just think that the storytelling efforts on this thing are fantastic, especially on tracks like Blood Sandwich and Dorks, and Lot of Years, of course. There is even a track called Kirby, and it's about his pet cat called Kirby. That's great. As I've said before, the turn-up kind of hip-hop bangers are super popular right now, but Injury Reserve are one of the groups out there that bring a lyrical focus too.
I say this ain't jazz rap, this that spaz rap, this that raised by the internet and they had no dad rap. Yo, I'm good, don't pass that.
There are introspective and emotional tracks here, but not before you're greeted with the lively punches to the face that are songs like What's Goody and All This Money and
Oh shit, oh shit.
They said that we want some more hits. They have a sense of humor about them, and this album is just a lot of fun. Even though it's significantly moodier than the previous mixtape, they haven't lost their good-willed charisma that made the group so refreshing to listen to. They haven't lost it at all, not even a smidge.
Though it was pumped through all the vents in the event of a total loss of control. He quotes Kendrick's control verse and spews his vitriol into the echoes of the bowels of this floating metal hull and holds his pillow.
A sci-fi slavery story featuring Clipping's most challenging music thus far. It's definitely an album to be listened to front to back, with Daveed Diggs' rap verses sounding almost like the narrator for a post-apocalyptic film. Hearing Clipping go down even more ambitious roads with a whole story set in space is honestly the coolest thing for the group. And that's just because their sound that they've established over the course of their previous EPs and albums and mixtapes really suits the premise that they're going for here. However, for something a little more at ease, pleasant, and like the musical equivalent to Honey on Toast, then you might want to invigorate yourself with the collaborative project of three very talented singer-songwriters, Nico Case, Katie Lang, and Laura Veers. It's Case Lang Veers. You've got the sweet and raw acoustic indie folk sound combined with the swelling string sections that come and go with grand, ambitious Baroque pop. This is such a beautiful record, and I would hope that this isn't the last album featuring these three working together, because this collab between the three singer-songwriters.
So how about that progressive thrash metal, eh? Victor are known for the epic sci-fi stories they tell over the course of their albums. Terminal Redux is another example of that. Conceptually, it's standard fare for the band. But this album features some of the most thrilling performances yet, vocally and instrumentally, especially instrumentally, on tracks like Pillars of Sand and Recharging the Void. Not only that, but the story itself is really fascinating, touching on the idea of mortality, gaining power, and greed, astronauts getting a little frisky when it comes to having an eternal life. It's good stuff to mess with.
A gorgeous indie/baroque pop album whose grand, luscious instrumentals contrast the timid, insecure protagonist. And yeah, that's my summary of this album. Really short and to the point, no fluff needed. Although it is ironic that me saying how short and to the point this summary was, it suddenly made this summary no longer as short and to the point as it could have been had I not brought it up. And now for a cold, whispery hip-hop album that you aren't exactly meant to bump in the whip. They're more like tracks where you just need to sit down and soak up all the atmosphere.
I grace on balconies, burn with cowardice shots. Without haste, learn alchemy, turn powder to rocks. Kept cautious, speak short and sweet by my long bitter. Wasn't shook though, I took bold and strong.
Just listen to those chilling lyrics, where the delivery is very cool-headed and deadpan, but the tension is just there. It's a clever album, comparing the lifestyles of a modern Brooklyn gangster rapper and an ancient Japanese samurai. The two actually have many surprising parallels, and the haunting, gentle beats help to bring the lyrics to the forefront.
All the kings and princes cannot break this quiet siege. Tearing me at the seams. What is left of me?
The lush, sunny and heartwarming baroque pop from Kishibashi just got even more lush, sunny and heartwarming with Thunderlust. Like I said in my review of it earlier in the year, it's like a massive plant just blossoming as this album's playing. Feel-good, well-humoured pop-punk record of the year. So many parts of this album click with me. Could be those crowd vocals that sound like a bunch of drunken friends at a pub. Could be those contemplative lyrics which are just sprinkled with dashes of humour. Could be the cheeky kazoo and glockenspiel, which are quite whimsical and silly and cut right through the fuzzy, rough guitar riffs. Could be how each song is like a short but satisfying burst of energy that seamlessly flies into the next. Before I list too many things I love about this album, I'll just be brief and say, there's nothing to worry about when it comes to worry. I think it's time another metal album made the list. I figured around now that I needed to dabble more in the genre for the years to come, because there are plenty of good things to be offered by a style of music that, quite honestly, I had never always been too interested in, up until now. I wasn't a fan of how undynamic Nail's latest album was. Metallica's return was surprisingly decent, but only decent, not a standout or anything. And Korn. I mean, granted, there's also the Moon Sorrow album that was actually very nice. And I guess Oozing Wound was very refreshing too. But what really grabbed my attention this year and revived an interest in metalcore, and even further than that, Christian metalcore, was an album that explored religious themes, but in a lyrically interesting way that could appeal to anyone regardless of their personal beliefs. It's refreshing, exciting, and as the record goes on, even uplifting. It's Lead Us Forth with Interlocutor. I could delve into the sheer epicness of the instrumentals, sometimes drawing influences from prog metal and post-rock on tracks like The Graves We Dig, or Logos, respectively. But that's just a given, really. When I listened to this album for the first time, the ferocious performances on an instrumental and vocal level were top-notch. I was already very impressed by that, but the real kicker for me, however, the lyrics and the song topics. Although Interlocutor might not necessarily be a concept album, its tracks are certainly linked together by the themes of overcoming the fear of death, one's eventual fate, and most of all, sacrifice. Emotionally potent and crushing, but actually very melodic in its riffs all the way through, this is an underrated metal album of the year from New Zealand. Yeah, rip from New Zealand, guys, woo! That isn't at all worth skimming over. It's just flippin' fantastic, this one. Death Grips!
Ideas I keep giving bad people, good ideas I keep giving bad people, good ideas.
Death Grips are known for being a noisy, chaotic group of scallywags, but so is the kindergarten down the street. Thing is, I prefer these guys' music when their noise and shock value is being used to portray a message instead of just being noisy for the sake of being noisy. Here they absolutely pull it off with one of the catchiest records since The Money Store. The trio pretty much execute what I might describe as a self-parody. I mean, you've got tracks here like Hothead, which are just blatantly parodying their own incoherent chaos. Others are displaying a more fed-up attitude, seeming a little tired out, like or Trash. If I were to take this a step further, I might even say the bottomless pit of this album is like kind of representing an inescapable trouble, worried about running out of ideas and shock value if they carry on, and worried about disappointing people if they stop. Ironically, despite the fact that this message is kind of signaling that they might run out of ideas or that buzz in the future, they actually still managed to pull together some of their most creative and surprising tracks for this album. There isn't a single track on here that finishes without there being one line that sticks with you. I keep giving bad people good ideas, I keep giving bad people good ideas, I keep giving bad people good ideas. Now here's one I didn't review in full.
Just as everything is falling into place as a storm, there must be a storm.
Indeed, Matt Elliott as a songwriter flourishes on The Calm Before, a fitting title for this neo-folk album considering its slow-burning acoustic instrumentals, occasionally laced with strings, and towards the end even some booming crescendos akin to the feel of maybe an approaching doomsday even, are just absolutely gorgeous. I'm definitely very impressed, however, by Elliott's lyric writing. They can be so blatant and explicit that you might even be taken aback, as well as the fact that it's sung so beautifully and nonchalantly. There are tracks on here that run for a long time, but never to a boring extent. They sound beautiful all the way through, to the point where you just never lose attention. It's dark, it's beautiful, it's twisted, some parts are reminiscent of a fantasy. Hold on a second.
Verbal tour, parkour with the metaphors, the flow house, the horror, dead boulder with metal doors. Hence, bitch, 6 cents with a nose drip. My sky dice, living bumps in the cockpit.
The idea of rapping about a drug-inflicted lifestyle, one filled with a lot of excess and just wild behavior, finally got the disturbing and wild presentation it deserved. Some beats on this thing don't even sound like they should be beats, and yet Danny Brown rides them perfectly. Indeed, this definitely deserves the title of one of the best experimental rap albums of the decade. While the lifestyle described certainly seems exciting and captivating, it definitely isn't meant to be a comfortable experience at all, and Danny only goes to prove that the album Atrocity Exhibition is very worth of its title. We've reached the top 10 albums of the year. The best of the best of the best, which is found from the genre of country music, a genre which I'm keen to explore even more now thanks to some of the great albums from artists like Lydia Loveless, as well as the Various Artists Project, Southern Family, which was led by Dave Cobb. And although I wish they could have made the list, the one country album that really blew me away, the one that became my country pick of the year, is definitely a must listen for anyone who likes emotional, heartstring pulling music. It's Sturgill Simpson with A Sailor's Guide to Earth.
That the answer was so
A classy and tightly knit country record with soft and tender ballads interspersed with ear-grabbing, exciting country rock bangers. A Sailor's Guide to Earth is my favourite record out of the many that this genre had to offer this year. You know, you're getting pop songs about pineapples, mayonnaise and pre-made sandwiches. This UK indie pop band certainly has a very good sense of humour about them when they present their pop music. And it's really catchy stuff. There's plenty of quirks, it's very idiosyncratic. However, they provide not just a sense of humour, but also a warmth to their music. It's very welcoming. It's certainly my pop album of the year. Plenty of stuff to dig into, plenty of stuff to get stuck in your head. A lot of memorable lines, and just a very likeable personality coming through. This is one I'll surely be jamming well into the future.
When the sun is going down, when the dark is out to stay, I picture your smile, like it was yesterday.
No Name was a real refresher for hip hop, at least for the people who gave some of their attention to her debut mixtape, which was absolutely fantastic. A little bit of jazz rap that was bubbly, effervescent in its instrumentals, but No Name as an MC seemed to carry a caring and charismatic personality. Her lyrics during the first half seemed to be just reminiscing on her childhood and some nostalgic memories. Then during the second half, the subject matter quickly switches to darker topics that you wouldn't necessarily expect to be covered in optimistic ways, like abortion or the fear of not being able to get home safely, or maybe even just straight up death. You wouldn't exactly expect some of these topics to be covered with such a joyous optimism. However, No Name just absolutely nails it on the head. I would even say this mixtape is heavenly. It's just an incredibly refreshing take on hip hop that is just so undeniably uplifting. Unfortunately, our next entry on the list isn't quite as happy or welcoming. Fortunately, the lack of these qualities is precisely the point of the music, and as a result, the somber, saddening tones of this album are executed exceptionally well. Radiohead, A Moon-Shaped Pool. I think it's fair to say that Radiohead have always been a band concerned with sadness in their music. However, it's never been as blatantly depressing or as shattering as it is on A Moon-Shaped Pool, where concern isn't just addressing fading love, but also a fading optimism in the world. You know, it's definitely a subtle, slow burner of an album, really, but the first time I listened to it, I was so hypnotized by just how gorgeous yet haunting the album was. Radiohead seemed to have really nailed the idea of getting that balance between being beautiful yet extremely creepy. Its somber sound and subject matter makes for a record that is perfect for those post-midnight listens where you're so just deep in thought. I've got to say though, A Tribe Called Quest released my favourite hip-hop record of the year.
You can't define us X, Y, and Z. It's a generational elitist, habit cheating, virtual think pieces.
CDs written worth medical science, brains defiant, thoughts heavy, baby, they're a major appliance. Leave a tag when...
They absolutely killed it with their comeback record, and sadly it is also the last album. However, upon a full listen, the album wraps up Tribe's long-running and highly influential activism and position in hip-hop incredibly well. Tribe present political messages, introspective messages, bringing out old friends like Busta Rhymes and Consequence to make guest features, bringing out some of the newer, more fresh artists like Kendrick Lamar and Anderson .Paak to make guest appearances too, pay a little tribute to some of the upcoming fresh artists that are very likely to hold a candle to Tribe's influential position in hip-hop, and importantly, tribute member Phife Dawg, who had passed away before this album's release. It's such a well-rounded album that despite its notable length in 2 discs, doesn't waste any time at all. I know quality was expected from Tribe when a new album was announced, but to be able to provide something so fresh and fulfilling that it could very well be on par with some of their previous albums that have reached legendary status like Midnight Marauders or The Low End Theory, of course. I mean, that in itself is just astounding. And kicking off the top 5 is an album that in many ways is almost too powerfully sad for any words that I'd probably be able to put to it. But I'll give it a hell of a shot. I mean, come on. It's Skeleton Tree.
If you wanna bleed, just bleed. And if you wanna bleed, just bleed. And if you wanna bleed.
Nick Cave's emotionally potent, dark, and somber side would be very familiar to fans of his work, especially if you've heard albums like The Boatman's Call. It might actually be my favourite Nick Cave album, honestly. So Skeleton Tree's very somber, introspective vibe definitely appealed to me instantly. However, it seemed that Skeleton Tree, seeing as it explores family, fate, and grief after the recent passing of his son, seems to just radiate so much more devastation, sorrow, melancholy. Cave's music here is deeply soaked in a haunting ambience thanks to the established premise, but also the journey of this album is Cave attempting to recollect his thoughts and make an effort to move on despite how difficult that may be. On a similar note,
I'm seeking out a place, one to give me peace, and everything between. I'm seeking out a place.
whilst this album may be loud and full of yelling, as with any post-hardcore album, it strikes me with a powerful and genuine emotion tangled and feelings of depression and desperation. It's about terminal illness, family, death, and moving on. As well as one of the most heartbreaking concepts of the year, Touche Amore's sound on this album is also more varied than usual, making it their most dynamic album yet. They essentially improve their sound, not necessarily change it. They didn't need to change it, but it's respectable that they still made an effort to kind of switch things up occasionally, and in ways that complemented the song topics at hand. For example, there's some post-rock influence or maybe some softer tracks. And also Julian Baker's on it, so that's a plus, honestly. This was such a crushing album to listen to, a cathartic rush that I get each time I listen to a song like 8 Seconds, or Softer Spoken, which have some of the most heartbreaking lyrics of all. And quite possibly my favourite singer-songwriter, who I've always adored at a young age, Regina Spektor, makes it up to the number 3 spot with her new album. I know.
And all the days they were longer, and the drinks they were stronger. The words we sang wrong, but the songs were remembered, and time just passed.
I loved the album when I first reviewed it, but after many revisits it just became too clear, and it made too much sense to me that Remember Us Till Life seems like top 5 material for me. And I'll tell you why, don't worry, I'm not gonna just skim past the reasons. I'd be so confident as to say it's her best effort since Soviet Kish. And I really mean that. Soviet Kish is one of my favourite albums of all time. Honestly, top 10 material for me. And those two albums share a lot of qualities. They're some of her darkest and most satirical, and at times some of her most instrumentally fulfilling too. Remember Us Till Life, however, takes it to a more dramatic level, and with lyrics that are certainly satirical and mocking, Regina's songwriting having a certain sense of humour to it, as well as some surreal imagery and some unexpected punchlines. For example, one song literally begins with the line, "Somewhere under the Grand Hotel, there is a tunnel that goes straight to hell." Like, wow, okay, that escalated very quickly. But instrumentally, her lyrics are only given more lift, and that emotional impact is enhanced by some soaring string sections that just weep and roar along with her vocals on tracks like The Trapper and The Furrier and Sellers of Flowers. They're just tracks all over this thing that just make me want to just weep. Remember Us Till Life. It's flippin' gorgeous. We're at the number 2 spot now. And here is one of the most energetic, smoking hot, and endlessly entertaining, literally endlessly entertaining albums of the year. It's King Gizzard and the Wizard Lizard with Nonagon Infinity. The fact that the whole album just seems like one massive track that loops on forever because the last track flows seamlessly into the first, it's just so convenient because by the time you finish the album, you are left wanting to repeat it again, so yeah. I mean, the way that each track sounds on this thing, taking influences from psych rock and garage rock, is just so nuanced and so unique. There's some really odd time signatures that don't actually break any flow of the track, but actually add to the energy and the sheer insanity of each track on the album. There's just so much power and passion going into this thing. And apparently King Gizzard and the Wizard Lizard are planning to release 5 albums next year, which is incredible. But I feel like if there's a band that could pull it off, is definitely King Gizzard, considering they've been very prolific. They've put out at least 1 album every year ever since they started, and they've all been very good quality. So yeah, I mean, I'm just really psyched for the fact that 5 albums. Goodness me. However, for number 1 on my top 50 albums of 2016, it just became too clear what it was going to be. I didn't even have to think about it, honestly. For a lot of people, this was a top spot or near top spot album because its release served as a sheer reminder of how monumental the influence and impact of music as an art form can be. As an artist, music can be made to portray a message, but very few artists get the rare opportunity that this legendary musical icon did, to stare his harrowing subject matter of death in the face and deliver a series of tracks that boldly and gracefully addressed it. It's an album that I think, well into the future, will be looked back on as a show of not just how forward-thinking and idiosyncratic this man was as a musician and an artist, but also how vital context can be to the music that it surrounds. The number 1 album of the year is David Bowie's jazz-influenced, dark, haunting, beautiful, and saddening final message to the world that is Black Star.
How many times does an angel fall
As if the music didn't sound devastating enough, Bowie's ambition on Black Star and his otherworldly songwriting made his late career seem so promising. Then, 2 days after Black Star's release, he passed away, and revisiting this album after the death of one of music's most influential and beloved people made us realize that this album was an entire message from Bowie to his family, fans, and even the entire world maybe. He basically knew at the time of recording this album that he was running out of time, so his last album was made as a way of saying goodbye, reflecting on his career and his impact, the idea of death itself, and the once shining symbol fading away gradually like a literal black star. Bowie's songwriting here, coupled with the context that inspires it, makes for an album both nuanced for his style, but also an album that is heartbreaking in its lyrical content. The more you read into it, the more that you realize how self-aware the music was. And therefore, for me, there was just no denying David Bowie's Black Star the #1 spot on this list. So, favorite album of 2016. That was good. Did pretty well there. I'll see you next year. Yeah. Thanks for watching.